Well, I would now like to welcome all of our speakers to turn on their cameras and mics and join us for today's roundtable discussion. So it's very clear to me in terms of broad themes and the content of today's talks that technology itself is absolutely not the slowdown factor in translating these disruptive potentials from theory into practice. Indeed, these technologies are accelerating things quite a bit. I wanted to start with a general question open to all of our speakers. Given that there is no issues really with the development of technology itself, whether we're talking about AI or AR, etc. So given that, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on major challenges from the other direction. What major challenges do you face personally, and do you see in the broader industry in keeping pace, I suppose, with the rapid increase in these technologies' capabilities, as well as the democratization of them and their increasing ease of use, availability, scalability, cost effectiveness, etc. In other words, how do you best try and keep pace with technology itself?
Indeed, we have seen dramatic increase in the complexity of technological landscape in pharma, and to me, like, one of the most obvious challenges is, of course, talent management, because the teams that the pharma companies needs to be kind of assembling right now are multidisciplinary. They must include not only biologists or cheminformaticians, but also machine learning engineers, and most importantly, business leaders who can understand the complexity and all these different aspects. And that's probably one of the bottlenecks. And we have to take into account also that there are new players competing for this talent pool. Like big tech is a very luxurious place to work. Like, for example, Google or Tencent, they pay high salaries, which is, of course, a cost factor competing for this kind of talent. And to me, this poses certain challenge for not only big pharma, but especially for smaller companies. And yeah, that's one issue that needs to be, kind of somehow addressed. And more strategical approach needs to be followed by these companies in pharma, in the biotech space, to kind of, stay competitive. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I can go next maybe. So yeah, I definitely second that. We had that problem early on, but I think we were lucky to find people who both studied computational sciences and also biology to a certain extent, so that they can interact with each other on both domains without too much constraint. And finding such people is not easy. So we had to broaden our search, beyond UK, a lot of people in Europe, some people in Turkey, we found a lot of people in the US. And now then the second thing is, how do you integrate such people, right? Without being in the office or under one roof. The second thing is, despite people, I think, being quite an expert in both of domains, they are normally stronger on one than the other. So like, how do you train them? I don't think you necessarily find the exact job specs we put out there. So we look for example, to give you one example, machine learning experts who also understand immunology perfectly, right? Like, how many of them are there? 5, 7, 10? You cannot build a team of 100 out of that. So that's a problem we have. But I think our problems would be much different than from Lantern Pharma, as they are, a different scale. For us, we need, if we have to scale, we need 5 more engineers, and we can find them by looking all around the world. But I don't know if you can do it if you need 50.
Very well said, Murat. Panna, do you have any comments with regards to that? Issues of scaling in finding specialists to find these synergies and unlocking the two pillars of this as a larger company?
No, I think they both summed it up nicely. It's all about people. I think that's key. I think you also need to have the people with the right kind of mindset. You can find brilliant biologists or molecular biologists and brilliant data science or machine learning. But you have to get them to work together, and smashing these disciplines is not always easy. And then also making sure your team is properly motivated or guided to being able to do best in class work or something, and not being afraid to do work that may or may not solve a problem. I think a lot of times it becomes very easy for people to use the same old approach. And there's so many new tools that unless there is a inherent DNA in the company to push boundaries and break things and try stuff that's totally different, you're not going to stay ahead of the curve. I mean, that much is guaranteed. So it's very easy, I find, for both scientists and engineers to become very comfortable in using the approaches that they become most familiar with. And that's human nature. You're going to always go to those tools that you know best. And, sometimes those tools don't always make sense when you're trying to create something totally new or totally from scratch. So having that mindset is critical too, and that has to be thought about a lot and encouraged.
Indeed, and it's a great reminder that yes, technology is a great disruptor in this arena, but so much still comes down to the human element, etc. Indeed, on the topic of scalability, I'd love to get everyone's thoughts on how these advances change the competitive landscape for large pharma corporations, pharma giants, if you will, compared to startups and scale-ups. I remember the early days of Deep Knowledge Analytics Pharma Division, one of the institutional co-founders of Deep Pharma Intelligence, early reports from several years ago where they were forecasting essentially the need for pharma giants to begin onboarding more AI specialists, creating actual divisions for the incorporation of AI into drug discovery and development, et cetera. We've seen that happen. We've seen pharma corporations waking up, but we've also seen AI pharma startups grow, scale rapidly, even go public in many cases, right? So what are your thoughts on the competitive landscape today for pharma giants versus startups and scale-ups, specifically at the intersection of pharma, AI, and other emerging technologies?
Maybe I can start with that heavy first step. So when you look at the pharma, actually, the people who has the budget and running those AI ML initiatives and the big programs, they have a different risk profile than a startup, right? You can go after, as a startup, very, very risky ideas that will be with a big payout. On the other hand, if you are, starting an AI ML initiative in a big pharma, as a well-established, upper management person, you might be thinking that maybe I should start small. I should start with a problem that could be solved easily. But we have to provide reports every 3 months, 6 months, a year, show some progress. It is a little bit, I believe, more difficult to take a long view in that setup. On the other hand, hundreds of startups, some ideas will succeed, some of the ideas will fail, but all moonshot projects, you are trying something innovative, and the way how the company is set up, the startups may be more amenable to pursue such projects. So I think it will always be the case. Doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank as a big pharma. On the other hand, in the startups, I think you would have an advantage. There are so many startups out there, a lot on the small molecules, a few on the big molecule side. When you look at them, I think the ones who have this wet lab component integrated in their company has a little bit of a distinct advantage, so that they can iterate faster, right? You generate some data, you apply a model, you have your prediction, you test your predictions, you are not dependent on anybody, right? Because if your pharma pharma is your partner, they would probably have different prioritization than getting your proof of concept work done. So it would be a limitation of your speed. I would say, yes, different type of projects, different type of ML projects when you look at the pharma and the startup ecosystem or the biotechs, and different type of, again, projects or speed when you look into startup companies with a wet lab capability and not.
Very well said, Murad.
Actually, I'd like to just add something. Basically, I've heard the opinion, the other day that this startups that have been built from the technology point of view, rather than like classical, biotech, which would come out of a lab with some molecule in mind, or maybe some, target in mind. So these kind of platform-based startups of new generation, they have an edge in that big pharma, again, this is just an opinion, but the opinion goes like the big pharma is not flexible enough to adopt these technologies to the extent that it changes everything. Like pharma can have like, use it as tools, maybe have some data lake, maybe have some cheminformatics or AI stuff going on, but it's not kind of changing the whole picture. Whereas, let's say companies like Moderna or your companies, they are built with this platform mindset from the very beginning. And when scaled properly, when resources are available to for testing, for wet lab experiments, etc., this platform-based mindset is much more progressive compared to more classical organizational structure. That's just one thing. And by the way, another thing, I had an interview the other day with the founder of one drug discovery in silico biotech. Actually, I don't remember exactly. It was probably in silico medicine or maybe something like that. So the idea was that nowadays you can outsource this kind of wet lab very efficiently to these little CROs like Arcturus or maybe some other companies, and they actually did it. So they have AI platform, and then all the wet lab experimentation is just outsourced across geographies. Somebody is doing some essays and sending data back, and they basically what they do is just train models and have new ideas, and then send back some order new experimentation with these CROs. And it's relatively cheap because the CROs are not huge. They are kind of startups themselves, like Antiverse, sorry, not Antiverse, I guess Emerald Labs or Arcturus, this kind of stuff. And by the way, tomorrow we will hear a presentation by Arcturus. Maybe we can also ask some questions there about this. But my feeling is that this virtual biotech paradigm, where you can essentially have sophisticated AI model and then do all the rest remotely, is getting steam. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll something quick to add on that one. That's something we were looking for the past 5 years. And although on surface it looks like, yes, you can do that, at least my own experience, that is not the case for any complex process. So we use face display very often, right? We talk to Emerald Labs, transcriptics, this and that. And then they say, sorry, it is not in, that's a process that we cannot support. That's one. And even if we could, their advantage is not necessarily scale. It is almost like a hyperparameter search. They can run 100 different experiments very efficiently, not necessarily the same experiment 100 times. So for those reasons, we decided to stick, build our own lab rather than going with these cloud lab technologies. But it's extremely, extremely fascinating field. And if it was available, we would definitely use it.
Interesting. Maybe the reason why I heard this opinion, because there was the small molecule drug discovery, maybe it's a little more straightforward and more services are available. But I'm not sure if that's the reason. But yeah, thank you very much. Interesting insight. I'd like to delve more into this biology space. I mean, biologic discovery space.
Yeah, let me give you my 2 cents for what it's worth. We do lots of different experiments. I don't think there's any right answer. I think it depends on the nature of your work. A lot of it can be outsourced, and there are a lot of unique things depending on the nature of your questions and the nature of your biology that it's almost impossible, as Murat said, to outsource because it's unique or it's being invented, or you can't pay CROs enough to be thinking about what you're thinking about. I don't think there's a binary answer that one is better. I think you can do a drug discovery company or a drug development company, more likely, where you outsource almost all the CRO work. We do that. And I do think that there are models where it becomes too challenging and too complex, even if you have the best project management people. So I think it depends. It's situation specific. And even in a company, it might change as they mature or change over time. So that's also another factor. So I don't think we should rush to make a judgment on what is better or possible. I think both are possible, and it all depends on the specifics. And even when it comes to a company specific, it may change based on the nature of the company and where it's at in the maturity cycle.
Well said, Panna. Indeed, this whole conversation of big pharma versus startups and scale-ups and specific, let's maybe call them infrastructural bottlenecks that larger pharma companies might have versus startups. I would imagine you would have rather particular insight because Lantern, has gone public, etc. It's made a rather large leap in scale. So I'm wondering if there are any specific bottlenecks that come to mind from your experience in particular, in terms of let's say what gets more challenging once you've made a large leap in scale.
I do think that it does get more challenging to start up lots of new wet lab work as quickly as you'd like to do it, because you have to validate the external lab providers, you have to onboard them, you have to find the right fit, you got to get the right timing. One of the biggest challenges that I see is actually much further downstream, and that's actually doing the big animal work. So small animal IND enabling work, you can find places, but when you get to, in the case of cancer dogs, you got to program that out way so far in advance, and that kind of timeline to program out the large mammal work is frustrating because it changes your timing a lot. And so as a small company, we want to do things faster, earlier, quicker, greater flexibility. And that's just not the case with some aspects of actually getting into trials, because a lot of the stuff is outside of your control, or there are bottlenecks in the global supply chain, or IRB approvals take longer than you think, or drug supply can't be sent to certain countries, or some sites require specialized, there are a lot of other details later stage that if you're a bigger pharma, you probably could control. And I've seen a lot of my peers, when they sell their companies to much bigger pharma, that a lot of those problems start getting solved a lot easier than when you're a smaller company.
Rings very true. Yeah. So very insightful. Thank you, Panna. Helen, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you have something to add here?
Well, I guess I'm kind of missed my point because Murat already said that there is kind of a trend, and we were showing this in our series of reports, both in AI and drug discovery, in the advanced technologies and pharmaceutical industry. The big pharma guys really do intend to collaborate, to merge with the AI startups, and to outsource them a lot of things to create this more feasible, more scalable technology to do it faster. But this is not the case for like all of it, but you can still also enjoy our reports to dig down deep in the cases where it works for big pharma and for such middle startups that they worked with.
Well said. Well said. Another question open to all of our panelists. We've heard a lot, reasonably so, about the disruptive potential of AI, and we've also heard a bit about the disruptive potential of AR. It's fantastic. I'm wondering if there are any other, let's say, fairly underrepresented advanced technologies, both now or perhaps down the line, that you see also disrupting pharma, ones that aren't as often talked about. I think that that's certainly the case with AR. It's fantastic to have.
Yeah, I think one area that will affect late stage development, and we've seen one big pharma use it already, Roche, in a trial, is the ability to create a virtual synthetic arm. So for control arms of a trial where you want a control arm, and you understand, the standard of care is, and within certain parameters, you can create a virtual synthetic control arm from existing population pools with a tremendous degree of accuracy and with a tremendous degree of focus. And so that can save a lot of time and save up to maybe 50% of the cost in a trial. So imagine you have a 300 patient trial for, recurrent stomach cancer that's HER2 positive. Well, 10 years ago, it'd be impossible to get that data to what happened to those patients really. Now it's not. Now, because of open EHR records and because of large scale genomic sequencing, it is very possible, and we're doing it now with our radar platform a little bit, is that we're able to say, okay, give us all HER2 positive gastric cancers and tell us, from what's the average survival post chemotherapy, post HER2, post chemotherapy plus HER2 after 2016. What is it in men versus women? What is it in under 65? What is it in African American? So if we do launch, and we're not in gastric cancers, but if a company does launch, let's say a phase 2 or a phase 3, and it needs to be 800 patients, control arm of 400, let's say for a phase 3, you may be able to pop up a control arm literally just like that, and answer the questions regulators might have, and say, okay, well, do you have enough people under 65? Do you have enough women? Do you have enough this group? Can you show us why you believe the synthetic control arm captures what's going to be happening in the real world? That's an amazing capability. It's not a breakthrough in technology, but it's a breakthrough in the availability of data and what that does to speed up the trial process, give better insight. And so I'm excited how that's going to affect future trials, because it could cut the cost down and bring medicines out to patients faster.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, we're definitely seeing both ends of this equation make fairly large advances. It's a reciprocal cycle. The power of AI models, et cetera, is really dependent on that data, and the democratization of patient data, perhaps let's call it, is really opening up very interesting avenues. So I'm quite happy that you somewhat preempted my next question, which was going to be about the future of clinical trials, and whether or not, or perhaps we should just say when, things are going to start getting a lot more personalized and precision in terms of specific populations in clinical trials. But before I go there, are there any other interesting observations in terms of, again, underrepresented technological disruptors down the line?
Yeah, we mostly work in the early drug discovery space, so we have a different kind of, I think, a focus in terms of the disrupting technologies. And I would say the reason why there are more, I think, small molecule AI companies than biologics companies is that the rules are known better. There are more data out there. So why there is not enough data for antibodies? And the thing is, it is expensive. The tooling is not there. But you see a lot of things coming through right now, like high throughput epitope mapping, high throughput SPRs, binding assays, high throughput developability studies. None of them is mature enough to kind of create the big data for antibodies yet. But I think they are on the very brink. Like it will happen very soon. There are multiple, I think, prototypes out there that shows that you can use light or magnetic arrays and so on for high throughput biological testing. And I think that will of course work for multiple scenarios. But then if you integrate as a big pharma to your pipeline and start generating huge amounts of data, that will be a big differentiator.
May I add also? Well, rephrasing your question, Franco, I would say that now the industry is in a state where we do have this kind of innovative tech like AI, like we have very powerful deep learning models. And by the way, a lot of stuff in AI is out of the box products, like we have frameworks and many labs can use it. And also on the other side, we have this new screening technologies and stuff like that. But in my opinion, the progress, this rapid progress of this industry enabled by this technology is now not in the technology itself, because frameworks are available, algorithms are pretty powerful, but rather in this kind of consolidation of, like, you know, maturing of the industry as the business process rather than the technology. It's like, you know, with the invention of the engines for the cars, you know, the one thing to invent the engine, the powerful algorithm, and the other thing is to be able to integrate it across, you know, big companies on the scale, so that the processes are connected and everybody has access to these insights by the systems, etc. So my opinion, the industry will have another like several years, maybe 5 to 10 years, where suddenly the whole landscape is changed, like with internet, like with, you know, like with cloud, for example. I remember like maybe 5 or 10 years, I don't remember exactly the years, but I remember everybody was talking about clouds, like cloud infrastructure, everything. The trend was only rising, and now suddenly everybody is using it. You know, we even talking right now using this cloud interface for Zoom. Everybody, the business is done in cloud. I guess something like that will be happening in the digitalization of drug design as the process. So we will go very much to this kind of automated processes everywhere. But that's just my opinion. Of course, it's
well, it's a data validated opinion that's backed up by quite a bit of analytics. So I think perhaps our final question for today relates to the future of clinical trials and the changing of the ways that, you know, drugs are developed for specific populations. So we're clearly seeing an increasing amount of population precision, etc., sparked and ignited dually by advances in AI and you know, literal mountains of data and the democratization of data collection and analysis among different population groups. So I'm wondering broadly how you see this changing the future of clinical trials. If you have any specific thoughts or insights on when we might be seeing these sorts of things occurring, that would also be welcome. Perhaps to put it more generally and provocatively, is the death of the blockbuster drug per se on the horizon?
I mean, I can comment just very broadly that indeed there is a lot of innovation in clinical trial space, both in terms of the experiment design itself, for example, recruiting patients, and not only recruiting patients, but recruiting them smartly with, you know, with electronic health records in mind, with certain biomarker features in mind, so that the drug responses are more predictable, the response rates are higher, etc., etc. So it's more on the operational side of things, actually. Basically, being able to have data analytics for the patient data at scale, and then being able to connect to those patients who match certain criteria, let's say for oncology research or for other kinds of treatments. This is the major field of that is now kind of having the Sputnik moment essentially. And another area is the biomarker, of course, is the biomarker development, because as far as I know, there is a pretty strong statistical research that shows the trials that have proper biomarkers implemented, they tend to perform much better compared to trials with less attention put into this. And of course, the biomarkers are now getting more sophistication due to the ability to again work with big data and have certain features about patients, let's say their genomics features, or this is very powerful for predicting the trial outcome. We don't need to test on all the cancer patients, but we can test on a very specific set of cancer patients which have certain biomarker, and we believe that the drug would be much more responsive for that particular patients with those biomarkers available. So that's just quite obvious, and that's where this artificial intelligence stuff come in handy. But again, said easier than done. I guess just we are in early days of this trend, and I have seen statistics, positive statistic on this. I have seen that AI, I've seen reports, and I can probably reference them later, that show that, let's say, some companies managed to apply such systems, AI system for recruiting patients, and got much better results, like by 30% or something like that, better results, which is huge. But again, this is just on case-by-case studies. It's not like the whole scale is changed right now. I mean, it's a lot of work to be done yet. That's
well,
by the way.
said.
Yeah. By the way, we have a question from the attendees, and that's quite interesting. Like, it's about COVID pandemics. What about monitoring and potential new pandemics? How far are we from convergence for drug development? So, as far as I understand the question, it's what lessons we learned from these pandemics, and how AIs can be applied to manage future pandemics better, to get drugs faster, etc. What's your opinion, Nord?
On the personal front, or in terms of antivirus, I think in short term it wasn't the great news, right? A lot of people that we work with had to shut down the labs, and then there are interruptions to the business and all of that. But at the same time, two good things happened. First of all, people had a lot of time to collaborate, and the BD people had a lot of times in their hands. And I think we all had 20 Zoom calls in a day back to back. And I think that created a lot of collaboration, sparked a lot of interest, potential partnership options. The second thing is, I think it brought in a lot of attention from other investors that wouldn't normally invest in this space. They noticed that how critical this is, and also that it might be a good area. So I think in the midterm and the long term, it's a good thing that that there are some silver linings to COVID. For the long term, if you can repeat that model of collaboration and being able to bring new drugs to the market much faster, that would be great. I mean, obviously, particularly on average, clinical trials will take 7 years, maybe a bit longer, and maybe it's not necessary, or there could be a better model. And I think that's really quite optimistic for us. For us, Antivirus wants to do 100 GPCR-related discovery programs between 2022 and 2024. But I would like to see most of those projects to have some assets getting into people and addressing those GPCR-related diseases like cancer, heart, lung conditions, addiction, inflammation in the next 5 years, not 12 years from now. So those are the things that I think. I know that I'm not necessarily talking about pandemics, but going through the pandemics as the industry, definitely there are some lessons that we could apply in general to do better.
I agree, and
Well,
yeah, sorry, Frank. I would agree with Murat, and I would add that on top of that, that certainly already we have this mRNA technology, at least in vaccine space, and indeed these pandemics kind of catalyzed the titanic shift in the vaccine development space, because now you can basically have a blueprint of the virus or whatever, the antigen, and then just essentially kind of print the new vaccine fairly rapidly. Of course, there are some challenges, but as long as we have the delivery system, lipid nanoparticles, and as long as we have mRNA's platform, we can have future vaccines really developed quickly. As to the drug discovery, as Murat said, and I'm totally agree that indeed, I don't think it's possible to discover a new, completely new drug, de novo drug design, like within 1 year, let's say, because anyway, even with AI, it will take years. But the drug repurposing obviously is the most straightforward and fast way, at least in small molecule space, to get, let's say, a new antiviral available. And by the way, this is what's happening. We all heard this news from Merck, I guess, from Merck about this new antiviral entering clinical trial with very good results. Hopefully we'll get anti-COVID drug very soon. The small molecule that you just take a pill and essentially cure yourself like from regular flu. I mean, who knows, but hopefully this is the case. Yeah.
The only thing that I would add, so yes, very much in alignment with both points that Murat and Andrei said, from a sort of general synergy standpoint and from a more technical standpoint of what was developed to scale during the pandemic. I would also say that there's fairly evident shifts in investment. I'm sure that when this whole thing started, a lot of us would have predicted a downturn, but we actually saw quite the uptick in biotech and health-related investments, which went hand in hand with the prioritization of health, or health as a sort of new wealth, a new asset class, and that perception among the general public. Health became quite important and quite prominent in a component of our daily lives, and I think we saw that as well in the investment space, especially with biotech and health, etc.
I would also like to add that maybe combining two last questions with clinical trials one, we have developed a report regarding real world studies and landscape of AI companies in this theme. So we could see some kind of corner store forming when the COVID begins, because the companies moved more to diagnostics and like telemedicine to predict such things for clinical trials, for imaging, for biomarkers, for risk assessment for the COVID itself. So maybe in the future soon we will have the some kind of application to monitor our temperature and other symptoms real time.
Yeah, expanding on this thought, we have indeed seen the very mixed references about the AI in these pandemics, and some people even claim that AI kind of failed to deliver rapid response. But I wouldn't agree, because indeed the clinical application of things like real-time diagnostics or stuff like that, this all takes time. And for the future pandemics, those kind of tools that were catalyzed and were just emerged, and they are not yet mature enough to be real clinical applications, they will get to the point that they will be clinically relevant for the future pandemics. I believe that's my feeling. So these COVID pandemics really catalyzed a major shift in digital health, as Helen rightly mentioned about telemedicine. And while telemedicine is not directly related to the R&D, but actually it's a very nice way to reach the patient that cannot be, cannot attend the hospitals or cannot get, help by any other means. At least they have this consultation that can be delivered online. And by the way, I was also, using telemedicine not for COVID-related stuff, but for other stuff, and was pretty great already. So yes, we have some good and positive thoughts for the future.
Indeed, yes. Well, let's be thankful for that. And Helen, what were the specific names of those reports, just in case some of our viewers might be interested in checking them out?
Sure. The landscape of AI companies in real-world studies, as always, available at our website. One of the latest one.
Just to finalize this idea, the report for the real-world AI applications was done with the Chinese partners, and we have very strong focus on the Asian market as well, because it's kind of underrepresented in Western media. And maybe our attendees, our readers, would like to check the report to get some feeling of what's going on in the AI drug discovery space, specifically in China and the rest of Asia, because that's really an important trend on the global scale, and it's a lot of interesting developments there. I was impressed, to be honest.
Well, fantastic. And for any interested viewers, once again, that report is available at deep-pharma.tech. Is that right, Andrei?
Yep.
Yes. Fantastic. I'll close off today's panel discussion with a specific question for Murat, given that the general trend of the conversation has been moving, away from discovery towards translation, development, etc. Murat, I'd be very interested to hear if you feel that the capabilities and scalability of AR technologies has kept pace with your aspirations as a company, and if you have any specific forecasts on how that area will change in the coming years, especially from a technology standpoint, AR specifically.
Well, I can only speak for our company and a few of the maybe competitors working in the same space. I think in the short term, when you're looking maybe to the next couple of years, what you would see, I'm hoping, an explosion in terms of clinical trials. So far, if you look at the challenging target space, and there are many big groups there, but one of them is GPCRs, and I'm giving my reference examples from there because I studied that the best. There are 2 antibodies that has been approved against all GPCR family, and there are hundreds of targets under that family alone associated more than 30 plus disease. And why that is the case? And because it is so difficult, it's so challenging to be able to extract such targets and keep it in an intact form, and to be able to then design something against that target. Now, there are so many technologies in this AR space that comes in either very early, representing that antigen in some way or form, or comes a little bit later, not for the antibody design, but for the optimization elements. And suddenly you see a lot of small players trying to solve a small part of the puzzle. And probably it's possible that one of the early AI companies to get a little bit bigger and try to either maybe merge with a few of them to bring and turn into a bigger kind of an AI first pharma concept, maybe the next GSK of this world. And I see that both going upstream and going downstream. It is so probably that's going to be the biggest one. And I expect some dramatic results. When we first advertised, we were saying, oh, antibody discovery in 1 day. And it was more of an aspiration than a technical reality. But I think we are not too far off from that, thanks to a lot of both wet labs and AI-based technologies being able to now converging and working together. Maybe one specific example is when you do a drug discovery project, you do not necessarily apply next generation sequencing at every step. It's not necessary. You do your panning, you collect a couple of clones at the end and work with them. But Now, machine learning and AI demanding more data from standard wet lab processes. So people start to think, okay, what else we can bring in so that it is not only a drug discovery process, but it's also a data generation machine. And the protocols are getting changed. Both parties are learning how to play with each other. And I believe, the patients will benefit hugely through that.
Well, that sounds like a forecast for a very bright future. And I'm so happy that we were able to have you with us today, because again, the AR segment of this disruptive space is not spoken of as often as AI, and not often as it should be. So very well said, Murat.